Madam President, today we are about to begin consideration of the nomination of Dr. Robert Califf to lead the Food and Drug Administration. This is an historic time at that agency. It has a record which is not enviable in terms of the way in which it has been dealing with the opioid prescription drug epidemic in our country. I want to give just a very brief history of what has been happening on that issue. Back 20 years ago, the FDA was asked to approve Oxycontin, which is just a shortened form of saying oxycodone continuously going into the bloodstream of Americans. Purdue Pharma, the company which manufactured that drug, represented that this would be a safer way of having prescription opioids go into the American medical system. Nothing could have been further from the truth. Because oxycodone, the material inside of Oxycontin, is molecularly very, very similar to heroin. So when you have a bottle of Oxycontin, oxycodone continuously in your cabinet, 30 pills, 60 pills or more, you're talking about having a bottle in your medicine cabinet that's very close to being heroin. Now, if someone said to you that your child, your family member, is now taking something that's very close to heroin, that would have a profound impact on you. But that's never quite explained to the American public, and that was something that was not understood at the time because Purdue Pharmaceutical Company was representing that it's safe to take Oxycontin. Well, it turned out that was not the case. Today we have an epidemic in the United States. More than 30,000 people in 2014 died from this prescription drug heroin epidemic, which is ravaging our country. This is a dramatic increase from 1996, when we really didn't even talk about it in our country. More than 30,000 people died in 2014. The number, most likely, much higher last year. The number, most likely, will be even higher this year as well. Here's the story. 80% of all people who are dying in the United States from heroin overdoses started on prescription opioids. Can I say that again? 80% of all people in our country who died in 2014 from heroin overdoses started on prescription opioid painkillers. So the pathway into this heroin epidemic is quite clear. It is the Food and Drug Administration approving these new prescription opioid pills without the proper safeguards having been put in place to ensure that it doesn't make the problem worse rather than making the problem improve. So that's why this debate on Dr. Robert Califf is so important. Because the Food and Drug Administration is saying they will not impanel expert advisory panels to review the approval of each one of the new prescription opiates that are in the pipeline right now over at the FDA. What's the evidence that that causes big problems? Well, back in 2012, the FDA had to consider Zohydro. Zohydro is a new prescription pain opioid. They impaneled a group of advisors, experts, to look at the drug. By 11 to 2, the expert advisory panel said, no, do not approve this new drug unless we establish a whole new system, standard in America for addiction, for abuse, for diversion of these drugs. Don't do it. The FDA ignored the advisory panel and approved Zohydro, with experts all across America attacking the FDA for not understanding how fundamental the culture in our country had changed since 1996 with the first approval of Oxycontin. Then, moving forward, the FDA decided that it would not impanel expert advisory panels at all because they knew, most likely, that they would vote no. And so on new drugs like Hyzingla, on Taganique, no advisory panels at all because it was said by those companies that there are abuse deterrents that are inside of those new opioids. Well, what does that mean? Well, abuse deterrent is basically going to the issue of whether or not that new pill, that new drug can be crushed, can be used for purposes other than what it's intended, which is to be a painkiller. However, if the individual just continues to take the pills in the bottle as they're prescribed, and they do it on a continuous basis, they run still a high risk of becoming addicted. And so the warning went up from all of these outside groups that expert advisory panels were needed. The FDA ignored them. Then we hit August of 2015. And believe it or not, Purdue Pharma wanted to get approval for 11 to 16-year-olds to have Oxycontin. Remember, this is heroin equivalent. This would go to 11 to 16-year-olds. And what they decided to do was to not have any advisory panel at all on that issue in August of 2015. Now, this, despite the fact that it was controversial, that it had tremendous social impact in our society, and that the FDA's own guidance says that advisory panels, expert advisory panels, are needed on drugs of that nature when pediatric dosing, child prescribing is in question. The FDA just ignored it. Then, when I put my hold on Dr. Califf's nomination, Senator Manchin put his hold on, we're raising this issue. We're saying to the FDA, we need advisory panels. We need a change of culture at the FDA. This just can't continue. The FDA said they would look at it. The FDA said they would study it. And then the FDA announced 2 weeks ago, no advisory panels for any of the new opioids which are in the pipeline over at the FDA because they are, quote unquote, abuse deterrent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, abuse deterrent is an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms. It's like jumbo shrimp. There is no such thing as abuse deterrent inside of a bottle of pills that have the same molecular constitution as heroin, especially if we're talking about giving it to kids 11 to 16 in our society. And by the way, if you want to know why there's been a spike in the number of breaking and enterings in people's homes, with people breaking in looking for these bottles of pills, I'll tell you why. Each one of the pills could be worth upwards of $80 a piece on the streets of America. Hear that number? So a bottle of 60 with 80 milligrams is worth between $4,000 and $5,000 on the streets of America. That's why when they break into your house, they don't take the TV. They're looking for that bottle of medicine. That's how much it's worth. That's how much they can sell it for. So when do we begin to get real about the fact that it's a bottle of heroin equivalent in people's homes? and that ultimately, when all their prescriptions are finished off and they can't get it anymore from the doctor, they wind up with heroin at $5 a bag out on the streets of America, and it doesn't make any difference which community you're talking about. It can be Boston, it can be West Virginia, it can be Kentucky, it can be California. It's all the same story, the same pathway in for 80% of all those who overdose on heroin in our society. They're still looking for that heroin-like experience. So we have a big issue here that the FDA is not responding to, which is why I don't believe that Dr. Califf should be confirmed until we have a change at the FDA, and they are not going to do it. We have to make sure that they understand that it is a coalition of pharmaceutical companies and physicians which have created this epidemic in our country. We're reaching a point where we're going to have a Vietnam War equivalent of people dying every single year inside of the United States on an issue created largely by the pharmaceutical and physician community in our society. So when do we start getting real about it? When do we start having a reality check that while we are 5% of the world's population here in the United States, we consume 80% of all of the prescription painkillers in the world. 5% of the population, 80% of all prescription opioid pills. Mix well, wait 20 years, a pandemic has broken out across our country. The FDA has a responsibility to ensure that we put the protections in place, that the warnings are there, that the dosage is correct, that the preventative measures are used to reduce dramatically the number of families who are going to be devastated by this issue. When people have back pains, when people have issues other than the most serious, life-threatening, we have to begin to discuss how long we want these people to be on something that has the same molecular constitution as heroin. It's a big issue. Lower back pain, broken legs. There's perhaps a greater danger from the prescribing than there is from the actual underlying injury in terms of the long-term consequences for these families. We've got to have this discussion in our country. We've got to have the kind of discussion that says that heroin overdoses in our country have quadrupled in the last 14 years. Quadrupled, and 80% of it started with prescription opioids. We have to have this discussion. Dr. Califf has been nominated as the new head of the FDA. They are not going to change business as usual at the FDA. They're not going to do it. They've already announced it. They don't want to hear from experts. Their slogan at the FDA is, "No experts need apply," to come in and give advice to the pharmaceutical companies and to the FDA. No warnings needed from anyone with regard to what this industry has been doing to our country and what the FDA has been approving. So this issue is one that absolutely is at the top of the list of the things that we have to deal with in our country. Last year, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the agency that actually approves how much of this opioid painkiller can be sold in America, and the way the system works is individual companies go to the Drug Enforcement Agency, they tell them how much they want to have approved, and then the DEA never tells the rest of the world how much they allowed each company to, in fact, manufacture in terms of this new pain, in terms of the pain killer, the opioid. They give an aggregate number, but they never tell you how much each company got approved. So what I would like people to do in their minds right now is just to think for a moment how many prescription opioid pain pills equivalent in Oxycontin, other opioids, were approved by the Drug Enforcement Agency last night. Just pick a number. How many pills total? Got a number in your head? I'm going to give you the answer. 14 billion. Can I repeat that? 14 billion prescription opioid pills were approved for a country of 300 million. That's a bottle for every single adult. A bottle, again, I tell you, with a material that has the molecular equivalency of heroin inside the cabinets of people inside of the United States of America. This just has to stop. It has to end. I understand it's a good business model for the companies that are manufacturing these things, but it's not good for America. It's not good for the families of our country. And the FDA has to stop. And that's why Senator Manchin, Senator Blumenthal, others who are going to be speaking on this issue, we don't think that Dr. Califf should be approved until they change business as usual, until they make a commitment that they're going to change business as usual at the Food and Drug Administration. They're supposed to be the guardian of our public health. They're supposed to be the arbiters of what is safe for Americans to consume. But they have not been doing the job. And I'm not talking about 1996 anymore. I'm talking about 2015 and 2016. I'm talking about right now, where the evidence of this national tragedy is manifesting itself in every community in our country. The least that the Senate should be able to say is that it really tried to deal with this issue that's been created by the pharmaceutical and the physician community. And it won't be enough just to say that we're going to authorize $1.1 billion for treatment, although treatment we need because there are millions of people who are going to need it in our society. But we've got to go back to the root cause of this problem, this flood of drugs that have gone into the society, the lack of prescribing education that physicians have to undergo. The FDA indicates that only 10% of physicians in America voluntarily even get educated with regard to what are the consequences of having a bottle of molecularly similar heroin pills to be put inside the cabinets of Americans. 10% of physicians. That's just plain wrong, ladies and gentlemen. We have to make sure that the education is there for the physicians who need it. We have to make sure that the pharmaceutical companies do not get the permission to be able to get these new pills approved until there's a new standard for abuse, a new standard for addiction, a new standard for the diversion of these pills, a new standard for what abuse deterrent means. Because right now, again, it's a contradiction in terms. You can still get addicted by taking an Oxy or a Percocet over and over again, day by day. You're going to get just as addicted. It's not abuse deterrent if that's how you're going to be taking it. You still wind up with the same problem. So we need to get real here. There is no bigger issue in our country. There is no more profound change that's taken place on the streets of our country. When it increases by fourfold in just 14 years, what's on the horizon for our society if we don't just put an end to it? So working with other senators, I intend on continuing this effort to explain to other members this problem, and I could not have a better partner than the senator from Connecticut, Senator Blumenthal, who as Attorney General in the state of Connecticut and now as a senator has focused laser-like on this issue. We're both committed to making sure that education of physicians becomes an indispensable part of the remedy, the RX that we in the Senate put on the books, so that at a minimum, that education is made mandatory for every physician who is going to be handing out these pills to otherwise unsuspecting Americans. And I'll just finish this way. One parent came up to me and they said, when a doctor says to you that these pills for your family member are good, you're not going to second guess the physician. You're not going to second guess him. You're going to assume that because the physician gave them to you, they must be good. And now this man said to me that his wife and they looked back and they said, should we have known more? Should we have done something different? Should we have tried to protect that other family member? No, it should be the FDA. It should be the DEA. It should be the physicians. It should be prescribers. They're the ones that should have had the responsibility, not the guilt that they're giving to families all across the country that they should have known more. No, ladies and gentlemen, this is the time for us to finally act on this issue.